Episode 24, The Residential Hut. Life presents us countless hurdles that over time, it changes the way we think and also the way we behave. Sometimes it makes us worse off than we were before, but sometimes it changes us for the better. For a young man named Jacob, a fateful night ensured that his arrogance was never the same again. For more than a decade, Jacob had stayed in his apartment home, situated in a quiet part of the city. Right beside his apartment building was a wooden hut that had been there even before his family moved in. Although he had never entered the hut and had only seen it from his bedroom window, what Jacob heard from his school friends who stayed in the neighborhood was that it was abandoned and haunted. He was also told stories about why the hut was still not demolished after all these years. Stories were told that construction companies tried to tear down the hut, but anyone who tried to demolish it would either get sick or, in more severe cases, would even develop a heart attack. So eventually, no one else dared to bring it down. However, despite all that he's been told, Jacob never believed in the stories since he had never experienced such supernatural encounters himself. Jacob was getting tired of the stories that he heard over the years, that one night he decided to enter the hut himself to find out. It was almost 10 p.m. as Jacob walked down his apartment stairs and walked towards the hut. Once he arrived, he stood in front of the short pathway entrance towards the front door that was partially hidden and covered with small, unkempt bushes. Jacob squeezed through the bushes and walked for about 10 feet before reaching the front door. He took a short flight of steps and went into the house without hesitation. Once inside, Jacob saw that the house looked old and abandoned, and as the home was small, he could immediately see the other end of it. Jacob also noticed that there wasn't anyone inside. After looking around for another 10 minutes and shining his torchlight all across the home, he felt no disturbances. Jacob felt that he had proven a point to all those people who tried to convince him that the place was haunted. He knew that he was right all along, that it was nothing but an old hut. Jacob walked out confidently out of the house and said, "Such a small empty hut, and they say it's haunted? They must be so bored that they needed to create a horror story." A few days later, while having dinner with his parents, Jacob suddenly recalled about his visit to the hut. He shared with them proudly that he had gone to the wooden hut all by himself and proven that the place wasn't haunted. Upon hearing what Jacob had just said, Jacob's mom turned worried and said, "Why did you go there, Jacob? It's so dangerous." "That's the thing, though, Mom. I went there all alone, late at night. If the place was really haunted, they would have come for me. I was in there for a good 15 minutes, but absolutely nothing happened," explained Jacob. Jacob's dad then said, "Don't be too confident, Jacob. Just because it didn't show up in front of you doesn't mean it's not there. For all you know, it could have been staring right at you." "I'm sure it's nothing, Dad. People just make up these stories to make the place sound more interesting. It's just an old, smelly hut," said Jacob. "Okay, that's enough talk about the place. Just eat your dinner, Jacob. If one day it disturbs you, don't you start crying to us for help," said Jacob's dad, starting to sound annoyed. The dinner ended in disagreement, with Jacob still stubborn about his stance on the hut. Later that night, however, was the night that Jacob's perspectives were forcefully changed. It was past midnight, and Jacob had fallen into deep sleep. But suddenly, he was woken up by a repetitive sound. As his blurry eyes slowly opened and he began to clearly process the sound he was hearing, Jacob now realized that they were knocking sounds. As he tried to listen to the sound closely, he noticed that the sound seemed to come from his window. Jacob then sat up and turned his head, but saw no one there. Out of curiosity, he got off his bed and walked to his window and looked out to see the wooden hut. Then he noticed someone squatting by the bushes in front of the hut. Initially, Jacob thought that it was someone trying to creep their way into the hut. However, as Jacob thought about it again, he remembered that it was clear from the outside that no one was in the hut, as the door was wide open. So he wondered why the person needed to sneak their way in. Jacob turned his head towards his wall clock for a split second to check the time. After squinting his eyes to see the time in his dark room, he turned back his head to look at the hut. That was when he realized that the person squatting was no longer there. Jacob thought that the person must have already gone into the hut, but as he was already losing interest in what he saw earlier, Jacob walked back to his bed, laid down, and pulled the blanket over himself and tried going back to sleep. Just as he closed his eyes, Jacob heard the knocking sound again. Annoyed at the repetition of the sound, Jacob tried ignoring it. However, after several knocks, Jacob's sleep was now completely disturbed. He got up and looked at the window. Seeing that there wasn't anyone there again, Jacob stomped towards the window to look outside. As Jacob peeked outside his window, he saw a family of 3 standing right in front of the hut, looking right at him. It seemed like a mom, a dad, and a daughter, all dressed in white, held hands as they stared at Jacob with eyes all flaming red. Suddenly, they collectively gave a wide grin and laughed hysterically while still staring at Jacob. Jacob then realized that his body was trembling, but he couldn't control it. He felt terrified, but unsure why he was feeling this way since he was never afraid or believed in the supernatural. It was like a natural reaction upon seeing the 3 spirits staring right at him. With his body still trembling in fear, Jacob rushed back to his bed and instinctively hid under his blanket. As Jacob remained hidden, he heard multiple knocks on his window, which now seemed like the whole family was knocking continuously. He pulled himself together, got out of his bed, and as his peripheral view saw what seemed like 3 beings floating outside his window, he ignored them and rushed out of his bedroom. With his ego completely wiped out of his system, Jacob rushed over to his parents' room and knocked on it furiously. Jacob tried to turn the knob, but the door was locked. As he aggressively knocked on the door, he could still hear the spirits laughing out loud from outside his bedroom window. To his relief, shortly after, Jacob's dad opened the door and asked, "What's wrong, Jacob?" "Dad, I'm sorry. I should have believed you," said Jacob as he stuttered. Seeing how his usually confident son looked so vulnerable, Jacob's dad didn't need further explanation. He immediately recalled where Jacob went a few days ago and what had possibly happened that caused him to lose every ounce of his confidence that he had. Jacob's dad took a quick peek into Jacob's room, and as expected, the spirits were no longer floating outside the window. However, Jacob's dad knew that it was merely temporary before they began haunting Jacob again once he was all alone. Jacob's dad then asked Jacob's mom, who was right behind him, to take out Jacob's clothes that he wore on the day he visited the hut. Jacob's mom then went to Jacob's closet in his room and pulled out the green t-shirts and black Bermudas that Jacob wore, along with the red running shoes and white socks. Jacob's mom packed the entire outfit into a clear Ziploc bag. Once prepared, Jacob's dad then explained to Jacob, "Jacob, we're going to leave this bag right at the hut's front door, along with this pair of scissors that we have prepared for this sort of instances. This will help to contain them and prevent them from haunting you again." Jacob then asked, "Are you sure it will work, Dad?" "You better hope it does, Jacob. Otherwise you'll spend every night like you did tonight," said Jacob's dad. Jacob and his dad went down to the hut, and as they stood in front of the bushes leading to the front door, Jacob was terrified about seeing the spirits again. Seeing how nervous Jacob looked, his dad then told him, "Calm down, son. The more you're afraid, the more it'll look to disturb you." The both of them took deep breaths and eventually went through the bushes, along the pathway and up the wooden stairs onto the front door. "Okay, Jacob, now just apologize for everything you said that offended them and apologize for trespassing. After that, put the Ziploc bag right here in front of their door and the scissors right on top of it," instructed Jacob's dad. For once, Jacob obeyed every instruction given by his dad without any questions. As Jacob apologized, he felt goosebumps at the back of his neck and a very intense feeling that there was more than one being standing right at the doorsteps and watching them as he carefully laid the items. Once done, Jacob heard footsteps walking into the home as though the spirits had listened to his apology and walked away. The aura of the hut then turned to one of a typical, quiet night, free from any disturbances. The intensity that Jacob felt earlier was gone now. Jacob and his dad left the hut, and from then on, Jacob never again saw the spirits that persistently knocked on his window that night. It took a fateful night to literally knock Jacob's ego out of him, as he realized from that point on that there was more in this world that meets the eye. And even if he couldn't see these spirits, as what Jacob's dad said, they could be staring right at him. A lesson learnt that day, a lesson from the small wooden hut.